Hi guys, so the channel has now gone past 60,000 subscribers. We're well on our way to 100k. I cannot express to you how blessed I feel, having so many people watching my content, tuning in, week out. This is our channel, and I think it's doing okay, in large part because of all of you, so thank you all from the bottom of my heart for all your support. Now on with the video. On October the 4th, 2023, the FBI contacted Essex Police to alert them about an imminent threat to life. They become aware that a man was planning to kidnap, rape and murder a well-known celebrity in the UK, Willoughby, a popular TV presenter. Within an hour, the police raided a home in the town of Harlow. They didn't knock on the door, they put it in with a battering ram, because they were aware that the man inside the property was dangerous and if given enough time would destroy vital evidence. As soon as they got into the property, the occupant, 37-year-old Gavin Plumb, was arrested. When the police began investigating, they realised that Plumb was not a fantasist. He was a man who had a history of abusing and targeting women and had spent years fantasising, discussing and preparing for the horrific crimes he was desperate to commit. The evidence they recovered included this video of Plumb filming the kit that he was going to use to abduct and rape Holly.
Hands and ankle shackles, ring and ball gag, 3 lots of rope, metal cable ties, 2 sets of handcuffs, 1 set of ankle. 3rd of the 10th, 2023. Holly.
However, this is just the tip of the iceberg of the depravity of Gavin Plumb, a dangerous, sadistic sexual predator who should never be released from prison. Welcome to Evil Among Us. This is a case that's very recently gone through the courts in the UK, so there may be information which comes out later, but I'll present to you what details have been published and those I've found out to try and give as full an outline of Gavin Plumb and his crimes as possible. This is important, as while the main focus of this man in the media has been his weight and general physical appearance, this has potentially clouded an understanding of just how dangerous he truly is. So starting at the beginning, Gavin Plumb was born on the 25th of February 1987 and raised predominantly in the town of Harlow, which is in Essex, a county in southeast England. He was the youngest of 3 boys. His mother's name has not been published, but his father's has, and his name is Adrian Broad. It appears they separated when Plumb was young, and Broad was barely in his children's lives after this point. In a recent interview he stated, quote, "We split up, and I had visitation rights for the boys, but I had to stop seeing them because my father-in-law said I couldn't bring them around there anymore. They all think I abandoned them, but I didn't. It's because I had nowhere to take them. None of my boys want to speak to me." I mean, that's such a piss-poor statement. Nowhere to take the children. What a load of bollocks. Take them to the park or find somewhere else to take them. Seriously, with all due respect, that sounds like abandonment to me. And also it makes me think there's probably more to that story than he's letting on. With regard to Plumb's mother, she's declined to speak to the press, but apparently stands by her son, and a family friend said, quote, "His mum is a big part of his life. She adores him and worships the ground he walks on. She loves her children unconditionally." Eventually, his mother married another man who worked as a security guard, whose surname, Plumb, he took. As a child, Gavin Plumb was described as being shy and awkward, someone who spent most of his time on his own. When he was around 13 years old, he began putting on weight. This affected Plumb, with him stating in court, quote, "You're supposed to be very active, out playing football, but I struggled with my weight. It really affected my mental health. It was something that constantly put me down. I wasn't able to do what my friends were doing, what my brothers were doing." A person who was a pupil at the same time that Plumb attended Burnt Mill Secondary School in Harlow stated that he was bullied repeatedly because of his appearance. Quote, "He would sit on his own in the cafe or on a bench in the playground. He was a loner. He never really talked to people. You really had to talk to him. Even the teachers had to do that when he was getting bullied." As time progressed, Plumb became more and more reclusive. Around this same time, he became interested in girls, but they would reject him and simply wished to be his friend. However, Plumb appeared to have an expectation that if he was interested in a girl, she should reciprocate. Despite his placid exterior, it's clear that Plumb's anger was increasing towards the world in general, but more specifically towards women. People who knew Plumb at the time believed that his rejection by girls as a teenager was key to him developing a hatred of women. This is correct, but only partly true. Lots of teenage boys get rejected and don't go on to commit sexual offences. This simply built on something that was already emerging. At this point, we have to touch on Gavin Plumb's childhood in order to understand the monster he became. You have a father who abandoned his son, which would have had a massive impact on his self-esteem and likely been another source of rage which he buried deep inside of him. It's not clear how Plumb's father treated his mother, whether he abused her, beat her, verbally berated her, thereby teaching his son that this was the way you treat women. However, I find the comments about his mother relevant, her worshipping the ground he walked on, her standing by him, despite, as I'll outline, the horrific things he's done, and her loving him unconditionally. I always find this an interesting term, unconditional love. I get what it means, loving someone regardless of hardships, mistakes and frustrations, but it can also potentially mean, and I stress potentially, allowing someone to get away with whatever they want, having no boundaries, and when they screw up, making excuses for them, not pulling them up on their mistakes, or worse still, potentially making them believe they can do no wrong. Everyone else is the problem, they are the victim. Also, the term worshipping the ground someone walks on, again, can potentially suggest something negative, giving someone an overinflated sense of self-worth, making them feel they're better than everyone else, that they're entitled to do whatever they want. So taking these things together, you have a child who was potentially exposed to abuse against women, who was told he could do no wrong, everyone else was at fault, who was never held accountable for his behaviour, and who, at his core, was deeply insecure, but was able to master this by being told that he was better than everyone else and entitled to do whatever he wanted, to whoever he wanted. I want to make it clear that regardless of his childhood experiences, as an adult, Plumb chose to act the way he did. He is entirely responsible for his own actions. Also, I want to stress that I never claim to know everything in my videos. What I say is based on years of experience, and I never say anything that I don't think is accurate, or at least in the ballpark. However, as we go along, I think you'll see the traits that I just outlined in the crimes of Gavin Plumb, especially his belief that he was entitled to do whatever he wanted, and in adulthood, this would involve dominating, controlling, and raping women. So going back to his rejection as a child, with this type of profile, Plumb would have seen this very normal experience differently, whereas other boys his age would feel sad, likely angry, and then dust themselves off and move on with their lives. Plumb saw each rejection as a slight against him. He wanted these girls, he was entitled to them, and they were daring to reject him. This developed into a hatred of women. This was likely compounded by the fact that some of these girls likely also bullied him. I think that Plumb inevitably had violent fantasies from a young age, and this included raping the girls that rejected him, giving them no choice but to submit to him, brutalising their bodies for his own ends, showing them who was in charge and what happens when he's not given what he wants. To him, sexual violence was his way to punish women for how poorly he felt they were treating him, and to make this sad little man feel powerful. However, as time went on, the pain and distress he fantasized about likely became central to his sexual arousal, and as well as raping these women, he thought more and more about brutalizing them in horrific ways which were clearly sadistic. There are currently massive gaps in our understanding of Plumb's childhood, and I imagine there were concerns about his behaviour for years. However, what we do know is that by the age of 18 years old, Gavin Plumb was already a dangerous individual, with a seething hatred of women and a belief that he could treat them any way he wanted, and he would begin a terrifying pattern of escalating violent and sexually motivated offences against both women and children, which would last almost 2 decades. In order to highlight how dangerous and depraved Gavin Plumb is, I'll outline his criminal history, but also punctuate this with explanations he's given recently in calls about his previous conduct. So in around 2005, when he was 18 years old, Gavin Plumb began dating a woman called Laura Roberts, who was the same age as him. They'd known each other for years, meeting when they were 12 years old, as she was the sister of one of his classmates. This was the only serious relationship that Plumb had as an adult. Laura has recently been interviewed by the newspapers regarding her 3-year relationship with Plumb, which was characterised by emotional, physical and sexual abuse. Others who knew the pair have also commented about his abusive behaviour. One of these was a friend of the couple who has stated, quote, "He was really nice at the beginning, and then, 8 months into the relationship, he became violent. It started off with emotional abuse and then became physical. He wouldn't let her spend money on what she wanted. When she was pregnant with their son, she had cravings, but he wouldn't let her buy chocolate for herself unless she bought it for him as well. They had arguments and he'd lay into her. They could argue over anything. It was stupid. He just seemed to love the power." Laura herself has also outlined all of the controlling and abusive behaviour that she was subjected to, as outlined by the following quotes. "He controlled what I did and who I saw. It was emotional stuff first. He made me feel like no one wanted me or liked me. He said that I had to stay home and do things with him. I didn't even see my family. We didn't really do anything but stay in. All he would want to do was stuff his face with KFC and Burger King all the time. He took my money and spent it on food, and I started to be very isolated and alone." However, his behaviour was not just psychological, but physical too, with Laura stating, "He used to hit me in the face, slap me and kick me. I'd be cowering in the corner, begging him to stop. He would smirk and laugh at me as he stood over me. He really enjoyed it when I was scared. I called the police when he attacked me on multiple occasions, but because we were together and I didn't feel like I could leave him and get away, nothing ever happened." The violence escalated, and Laura said, "He had a row with his mum about me. He came to my flat and grabbed his bike and laid into me with it. He turned his bike around and tried to whack me with the back wheel in the head. Then he tried to throw me over the banister. We were 2 flights up and it was concrete. He dangled me over it. I screamed and screamed. I used to fear for my life all the time when I was with him. After he attacked me, he said sorry, but at the time he just enjoyed the power way too much. He couldn't snap out of it, no matter how much I begged. There was no way out." Confirmation that Laura called for help has been confirmed by Essex Police, who have stated that Gavin Plumb was arrested at least once for domestic violence, but was never charged with any offences. It appears that Laura did manage to escape the relationship for a short time in around July 2006, and this infuriated Plumb, galvanising his hatred of women, and in the absence of abusing Laura, he went looking for other females to victimise. By this point, Plumb was working at various car parks where it's reported that he was serviced ticket machines. He would travel between these locations via the Stansted Express train service, which is a train that runs from central London to Stansted Airport. He was clearly using this to identify potential targets, and in August 2006 he was struck twice in the space of just 2 days. On the 14th of August 2006, Plumb approached a female Ryanair flight attendant and motioned to her to be quiet, before handing her a note which read, quote, "I'll do anything, so keep quiet and get off with me at the next station. Otherwise, I will shoot you and everyone on this train." The woman became distressed, and other passengers noticed and came to comfort her. This spooked Plumb, and he moved to the end of the carriage and then got off at the next station. Showing the predatory nature of Gavin Plumb and how devious he was, he quickly modified his plan and 2 days later struck again. Again, Plumb tried to abduct a female flight attendant who was travelling on a train to Stansted Airport. This woman, a French national, has recently come forward to describe her harrowing ordeal at the hands of Gavin Plumb, but wanted to remain anonymous. We'll call her Marie, just for ease of telling her terrifying story. On the 16th of August 2006, Marie was dressed in her Ryanair uniform and was on her way to her flight at Stansted Airport. It appears this was early in the morning, as the train she was on was completely empty, apart from her and Gavin Plumb, who approached her. Marie later stated, quote, "As soon as he walked over to me, all of my senses said something was not right. My hair stood on end and I froze. I had my uniform on, so I had my skirt on, and he touched me on my bare leg. His hand was massive, it was like a huge paw. I felt physically sick. He repulsed me then, and I'm still haunted by it now. Because I'm quite petite, and he was so massive, I felt in immediate danger. There was no one to help me." Plumb then signalled for Marie to stay quiet. She continued, "He was very close to me. I was leaning over, and I could feel his breath on me. He flashed a card and said, 'There you go.' It was like he showed me an ID card or something, but it was so quick. This was Plumb apparently trying to convince Marie that he was a police officer. He also passed her a note which said, quote, "I'm a police officer. You have to get off at the next station for a quick chat." Marie was suspicious, saying, quote, "Even though I was a foreigner in England, I was still not convinced by him. I think he sensed this." I said nothing and waited to see what would happen. It was scary because the carriage was deserted, but it was daytime. Marie was right. It appears Plumb sensed her reluctance and got off at the next stop. Marie continued her journey and got off shortly afterwards at Stansted Airport. She told security, who called the police, and within an hour, Gavin Plumb had been arrested at a nearby station. When he was handcuffed, Plumb was found to have a rope in his pockets, as well as an imitation handgun. He told officers, quote, "My little brother uses my coat. He pretends to be a police officer. I've just remembered, there's a gun in my pocket." Despite clearly demonstrating predatory sexual behaviour, Gavin Plumb was only given a suspended sentence for 2 counts of attempted abduction, which is absolutely ridiculous. Soon after this, he wormed his way back into Laura's life, claiming to her that he'd been falsely convicted. She was young and believed she was in love, and so forgave him. Plumb would soon begin abusing her all over again. In 2007, Laura fell pregnant with their first child, and they moved into a flat together. However, a few months after their son was born, Laura left Plumb, fearing for her safety. Just want to raise something I noticed. I found this picture of Laura, Plumb and their son, and whilst he is beaming like an idiot, look at Laura's face. If that's not a forced smile, I don't know what is. Unfortunately, it seems that Plumb again manipulated his way back into Laura's life, and in around September or October 2008, he raped her on the floor of their property whilst their baby son was in his cot. At this point, Laura took her son and fled for good, hoping she would never see her abuser again. However, in November 2008, Laura found out that she was pregnant and decided to report Plumb to the police for rape. He was arrested, but the case was dropped due to insufficient evidence. Again, pathetic piece of shit that Gavin Plumb is, needed to take out his anger on someone. In his mind, he should be allowed to do whatever he wanted, whether this was raping or beating women, and they should always be at his beck and call. How dare Laura escape and report him to the police? In his mind, he is the victim. Everyone else is at fault, in particular women, and they need to be punished. And so, with the breakdown of his relationship with Laura, he set out to get his revenge against a gender he despised. Plumb's next victims were 2 16-year-old girls, Emma Ashby and her best friend Louise. In December 2008, they were working in Woolworths in Harlow, where Plumb was also employed as a shop assistant. One night, after the shop had closed, the pair were in the stockroom working on their own when they were attacked by Plumb. I'm going to play a recent clip of Emma describing the horrific experience which she's still struggling with almost 16 years later.
The store was shut at the time, so it was just us in there. He told us that he was happy to help us get them down, as being 16 years old and a can of a big pallet of drinks is quite heavy. Yeah. He was happy to do that, and before he did that, he actually pulled a knife out of his pocket on me and my best friend Louise. He held the knife to us and said to us, "Get to the back of the stockroom." And me and Louise, we just looked at each other and laughed because we just thought that he was joking.
You thought he just wasn't being serious?
No, we just thought, obviously having never been in a situation like that before, we just thought he was having a joke, and we didn't think anything of it. We were facing him with our backs against the back wall, and he told us to turn around and face the wall, to which we both did straight away. He then told us to put our hands behind our backs, and he pulled out some rope out of his pocket, and the rope was all tangled and he couldn't untangle it. So he chucked it on the floor and then pulled out some tape. He came behind me and started taping up my hands, which were held behind my back with this roll of tape, just kind of going round and round. And he taped them together behind my back. And then he asked me to turn round, and I turned round to what I assumed was to put tape over my mouth. And before he could do that, Louise ran, and that was when I managed to make a run for it as well, because Gavin went after Louise. I ran through the stockroom because I knew exactly where to go. I started trying to pull my hands away from each other out of the tape, because to get out of the stockroom you had to type a code in to get out. So I ran towards the doors and then down a flight of stairs out onto the store floor, to which I was crying at this point, shouting and screaming, trying to alert the other members of staff that were at the front of the store. The store was shut at the time, so it was just us in there. And then some of them came running up to me. One of the first things I remember saying is that Louise was still up there. And they ran straight up there and they managed to get Louise. And I was just with the other staff members who were calling my parents, calling the police. He's had other attacks before mine, and he's extremely dangerous. He's heavily planned the Holly Willoughby case, and it just shows that he's capable of doing exactly what he's planned.
It's clear that Gavin Plumb's intention was to rape these girls. So in the space of 2 years, you had this predator who had targeted 4 women, clearly with sexual intent. On both occasions, he'd been armed, and these were just the crimes we know about. And what sentence did he get for attempting to abduct Emma and Louise? 32 months in prison. Here's the kicker. Recently when in court for the plot to rape and murder Holly Willoughby, Gavin Plumb was asked about these offences. He admitted that he had a, quote, stewardess fetish at the time of the first set of crimes, but claimed that his offending overall was merely a cry for help, with him claiming that what he did to both the women on the trains and those in Woolworths was him trying to get himself sent to prison to escape the toxic relationship with Laura Roberts. He specifically said, quote, "For me, it was my only option. Being in the relationship I was in, it was toxic. I was extremely young and I needed to get out." I mean, this is so messed up on so many levels. Firstly, it's clear that the relationship with Laura was toxic because of him, and him claiming the opposite was just another way of re-victimising her years later, trying to portray Laura as violent and unstable. But even if this was true, what the fuck sort of explanation is that? I wanted to escape a toxic relationship, so I decided the best thing to do was to get sent to prison, and out of all of the things I could have done to achieve this, I tried to abduct women off trains and tied up teenage girls. Again, you get an example of the pathetic man that Gavin Plumb is, the perpetual victim and misogynist. Yes, I did these things to these women, it was only because another woman was being mean to me. Please, everyone, feel sorry for me. After Plumb's conviction in 2008, Laura Roberts managed to get a restraining order, banning Plumb from having contact with her and their 2 children. However, when he was released in 2010, he tracked them down and turned up at the house unannounced. Laura called the police and Plumb was arrested. She then moved out of the area, taking the couple's 2 children with her. The next time her or the children saw Gavin Plumb's face was when he'd been arrested in 2023, and his picture was in every newspaper up and down the country. When asked if she believed whether her previous partner would have gone through with his plan to abduct, rape and murder Holly Willoughby, Laura responded, quote, "There was just no doubt about it in my mind, and if it wasn't that poor woman, it would be someone else." After his release in 2010, Gavin Plumb disappeared into his depraved online fantasy world, and it was here that he began planning further acts of sexual violence against women. In 2011, a year after his release from prison, Gavin Plumb got a job in Pizza Hut, but within 12 months had to quit due to issues with his weight. Over the next decade, he essentially lived in his own world of fantasy, spending 99.9% of his time, according to him, on the internet. Almost all of this was related to looking for pornographic images and engaging in sexualized conversations in chat rooms, which became more graphic and disturbing as time progressed. Over this time period, he collected millions of pornographic images and videos. For around 9 of these years, from around 2012 to 2021, due to his weight issues, with him being 35 stone, or around 490 pounds at his heaviest, Plumb claimed he didn't leave the house, sometimes for years at a time. This may have been an exaggeration by him to gain sympathy, but it's clear Gavin Plumb was dangerously overweight and had associated health issues, and whilst ordinarily I would feel some level of compassion for someone in that position, it's clear this was the only reason he was not able to act on his disturbing fantasies sooner than he did and create more victims. When Gavin Plumb first became obsessed with the TV presenter Holly Willoughby is unclear. For those not from the UK, Holly Willoughby has been a regular face on television over here for almost 20 years, and she's most well known for having hosted a breakfast show called This Morning, which she did from 2009 to 2023. In court, Plumb stated he became obsessed with Holly soon after he quit his job at Pizza Hut, as he was watching her every morning on television. She would then become a topic of conversation in the chat rooms he used, where men would speak in graphic terms about sexual acts they wished to perform on women, including celebrities. Plumb stated in court that he would think about Holly Willoughby around 6 times a day. It appears that Plumb's first thoughts about kidnapping Holly Willoughby began in 2011. On the 11th of September of this year, he made a Google search which read, "How to meet people who plan to kidnap celebs." Many other internet searches performed by Plumb were disclosed during his trial, and this included the following: killers from Harlow in Essex, have you ever been sexually assaulted or raped when you've been spiked, rape in the United Kingdom, violence against women, rape, man who raped 5 women he met online dating app, and what does it feel like to be raped? It's important to point out that whilst Gavin Plumb's main and most enduring obsession was with Holly Willoughby, police later recovered a Word document entitled Wishes, as well as a handwritten note which included the names of 136 female celebrities that he was obsessed with, and if he was successful in kidnapping his primary target, he would have worked his way down the list. In 2014, Plumb began buying the tools he was intending to use on his victims. He bought what was described in court as a BDSM kit, which included handcuffs. He claimed that he'd had a brief relationship with a woman who was interested in bondage, and that he'd bought these items because he was hoping to get back together with her. He refused to give her name so that this story could be checked, clearly because he was lying. He added to this collection over the next 9 years, and eventually had cable ties, handcuffs, a ball gag, leather restraints, rope, whips, and a blindfold. He also purchased what he believed to be bottles of chloroform from the internet, which turned out to be fake, but he didn't know that at the time. Plumb would boast about his previous offences, revelling in his behaviour, citing that he was unsuccessful only because he didn't plan things properly. He also referred to at least one of the flight attendants he targeted as a slag. As I stated, Plumb's weight was one of the main impediments to him acting on his sick desires, but in 2018 he had a gastric band fitted and was put on a liquid diet. He was actually interviewed by the BBC during this year about his struggles with his weight. This is a short clip of that interaction.
I only really go out my front door to put a bin bag in the bin just outside the flat. And that's every few days, but that's about it. It's frustrating because I'd love to just pick up a football and go down the field, and I can't.
By the point of this interview, Gavin Plumb was already a rapist and had a criminal record. He was also fantasizing about abducting and brutalising Holly Willoughby. To be clear, whilst this was about sex, Plumb was driven by a deeper desire, sadism. He wanted to degrade, dominate, and terrify women. His former partner, Laura Roberts, highlighted this part of Plumb's personality, stating he would laugh and smirk when he was abusing her. He enjoyed the fear in her eyes, her terror. It's clear from his internet searches that his plans related to Holly also involved killing her. This was not only to dispose of what he considered to be an object when he was done with her, but also a way for him to wield ultimate control over her. Whilst he remained extremely obese, it appears that Gavin Plumb was able to lose around 10 stone or 140 pounds after the gastric band operation, and this increased his mobility, meaning he began to put his plan to abduct and rape his celebrity obsession into action, in collaboration with other sick individuals he spoke to online. It appears that Gavin Plumb's plan related to Holly Willoughby began to take specific shape in 2021, 2.5 years before his arrest. Around this same time, due to being more mobile, he got himself a job as a security guard. It's reported that he was working at a shopping centre, and reading this automatically made me shudder. Can you imagine him working security in this environment, a man obsessed with sex? No doubt he would use his position to intimidate and abuse women. So you've stolen something? I won't call the police if we can come to some kind of arrangement. In between work, Plumb was on his computer planning. He was part of a group called Abduct Lovers, which had around 50 members, with him using the screen name Big Bear. Within this group, he communicated with other sick individuals who also had women they wanted to abduct. Plumb spoke in graphic detail to these men about abducting, raping and killing Holly Willoughby. To give you an idea of the type of scum that Plumb was speaking to, we'll look at one of his main contacts, a man called Mark. This is not his real name, but this has not been released yet. Mark is reported to be a man who lives in the Leinster area of Ireland, and who has previous convictions for possession of indecent images of children and harassing women. It appears his electronic devices have been seized and the Gardaí are investigating. Many other men were involved, who I assume are being tracked down. With these men, in particular Mark, Plumb spoke in graphic detail about what he wanted to do to Holly Willoughby, and he shared with them many of his 10,300 images of the presenter, many of them deep-fake pornographic images, as well as sending other material showing women bound and gagged, and pictures of dungeons. Gavin Plumb spent a considerable amount of time gathering information about Holly, including her daily routine, her home address, the layout of the property, and what car she drove. To be clear, all of this was done online. It doesn't appear he ever actually went to her home or followed her, etc. He spoke online about flaws in the security system that could be exploited by the men, and even spoke about applying to be her personal security guard to get close to her. He was also looking at other ways to try and bring himself into proximity with Holly, including looking into taking a tour around the studio where she worked, with the hope that it would involve meeting her. Plumb was also researching locations where Holly could be held, where she would be repeatedly raped over days, weeks, maybe months. Eventually he said, quote, "We've got somewhere in the country to keep her, a stud farm that's abandoned. It's got cells." According to recovered messages, there are at least 11 other men who were stating they wanted to be involved in Gavin Plumb's plan, with him discussing expanding the operation to include abducting more women, as he outlines in these voice notes, as well as him discussing general planning.
Yeah, we get this lot on board, mate. It's going to be the original. Holly, obviously, our original targets, and then whatever else targets they want, because we've got about 15 cells we're looking at filling. So, yeah, it's all good. Well, there's going to be about 12 of us, mate. So, realistically, we could pick up 2 at once, maybe 3. Yeah, you know, Adam's main one is our main's Holly, so realistically we could do both at the same time. Meet up, swap vehicles, get both in the same vehicle, taken to their new location, basically. Nothing's confirmed at the minute, mate. Don't celebrate too early. But yeah, it looks like it's back on track for once. Obviously you'll find out when everything's planned, etc. So yeah, we'll go from there.
By around August or September 2023, everything was coming together. Plumb stated the plan was to target Holly Willoughby's home, and that he'd also taken into account how to deal with her husband, Daniel Baldwin. He wrote that the plan would be a, quote, home invasion, so he'll use the chloroform on him and her husband, tie both up, take her, leave him, then it's take to where she's being kept, and enjoy her. He also sent voice notes to others regarding his plan.
I think my place might be better because there's cameras everywhere. It's just a temporary thing. Hold her here. You've got bed, you've got warmth, etc. No worries, bud. Yeah, I've been just telling the guys that basically we're waiting on you. We're using your idea for the wait until DOI is done. Once DOI is done, we're literally getting everything in place. The only thing we're missing is somewhere to hold her. Right, plan of action. I'll give you a brief rundown. Basically, we're going to hit it at night. Less traffic on the road, etc. Chloroforms, both of them. That way then they can both be easily restrained. Pick out outfits of hers that we like. And then obviously take her and the outfits with us. And then we're gone.
Closer to the intended event, Plumb gave more graphic details about the home invasion itself, with him writing, quote, "We break in when they're in bed. We hold both at weapon point, tell both to roll over on their fronts, with their hands behind their backs. With Dan, we use the metal cable ties. With Holly, we use the handcuffs, etc." In a truly deranged voice note, Plumb believes he has a way to get around the issue of consent so that he would not be prosecuted for kidnapping and raping Holly.
We're then going to force her to make a video just saying that she come with us under her own free will, that she's with us under her own free will. No, she's fully consenting into everything we do to her. So that covers us.
It appears that Gavin Plumb tried to contact Holly directly on at least one occasion. On March 29, 2023, he sent a message via one of her social media accounts in which he wrote, quote, "Hi Holly, I doubt you'll even reply, but I wanted to see if you're aware that there are some very real looking images of you online." Tamagi later wrote, "If they respond, I'll tell them that I can get them removed depending on what they'll do for me, laugh out loud." It's clear that he was trying to draw Holly Willoughby into a trap, and this shows this man's obsession with achieving his ultimate objective. In court, as we'll get to, much was made of Plumb's weight and how his plans were unfeasible because of his physical condition. However, he'd obviously taken this into account and was recruiting people to do the majority of the work for him. But as time progressed, more and more of the men he'd been communicating with, including Mark, backed out. Whether they were ever serious is unclear, but this meant that Plumb became impatient and was desperate to find recruits as he set his sights on dates in early October 2023 to carry out his plan. He wrote, quote, "I'm at the point where I don't care about the risks or consequences. Restraining and getting her has been my ultimate fantasy for way too long, and I'm now at the point that fantasy isn't enough anymore. I want the real thing." Gavin Plumb's eagerness to find participants to live out his ultimate fantasy would be his downfall, as he would reveal his plans to an undercover police officer. On Tuesday the 3rd of October 2023, an undercover police officer from the Owatonna Police Department in the US state of Minnesota was observing the abduct lovers group. This officer used the pseudonym David Nelson. David saw Plumb posting a picture of Holly Willoughby in the chat with the caption, quote, "The one in the public eye I want." David decided to contact Plumb, and the exchange went as follows, quote, "Alright, I'll bite. Who's the hottie with the lazy eye?" Plumb sent a message back of Holly Willoughby on a beach with the message, "She's in the public eye but doesn't have her own security." David responded, "Why did you post her up in the abduction group?" Plumb replied, "Why do you think?" Plumb asked David if he was up for it, and he responded, "I'm in New York, never heard of this gal, but I could travel if this was a serious thing." Plumb assured him that he was serious, and in response to David's question, "How the hell would you pull this off without the cops finding out?" Plumb wrote, "Night home invasion. By the time they're called, I'll be long gone." David interacted with Gavin Plumb for around 30 hours, and during this time, he disclosed in graphic detail the sexual violence he was going to subject Holly Willoughby to, as well as his intention to keep her in a cell and force her to record something to claim that she'd not been abducted and everything was consensual. He sent pictures of his restraint kit and bottles of chloroform, as well as information on Holly and a map showing a route from his house to hers. He stated the plan was to take place within a matter of days and assisted David with looking up flights from New York. The pair also spoke about recruiting others. The most chilling exchange occurred when David asked Plumb whether he intended to return Holly eventually, to which he responded no. When asked what he intended to do with her, Plumb said, quote, "Slit her throat, clean her out, and dispose of her." He elaborated on this by saying that he'll wash her body with bleach and dump her body in a lake. David Nelson, whose real name is not known but is an absolute hero in this case, determined that he was not talking to just another fantasist and that Gavin Plumb posed an imminent threat to life. He alerted the FBI, who then contacted both the Metropolitan Police and Essex Police. Within an hour, a team of officers were outside Gavin Plumb's property and they'd come heavy. Here's the video of his arrest.
Police! Stay where you are! Do not touch anything! Who else is home?
What's going on? What the hell is going on?
Listen to what our colleague's got to say. Right, you're under arrest on suspicion of conspiracy to kidnap. You do not have to say anything.
What is going on? What are you talking about?
Mention one question, something which relates to line into anything you do, so make it give me.
Can you tell me what you're talking about?
You're getting your new vein, alright?
are very gentle.
Necessities for the arrest are to allow for a prompt and effective investigation by interview and to prevent any further physical harm to the person. Okay, we'll talk about it back.
To who? Can you please explain to me what the hell is going on?
So, at the moment, you're under arrest for conspiracy to kidnap.
Who?
Holly Willoughby.
I don't think those ones are warm.
That's the allegation.
Okay, where's that come from?
Like I said, it'll be explained to you in custody, and you'll be interviewed about it. I'm not going to tell you any further than that at this current time, okay?
Okay then.
But that is the allegation. Yep.
I'm not going to lie, she's a fantasy of mine. I mean, she's a fantasy of upgrade, isn't she?
Right. You can go anywhere in Florida. Being destroyed.
Mate, if you'd have knocked, I would have opened and spoke to you.
As we said, the reason
I was literally just about to go to bed.
The reason that they're going into that is because of the offence that you've been arrested for. We need to make sure that we can gather as much evidence as we can as quickly as we can. So we've had to put the door in to secure the evidence. All right.
You've got there's no reason.
Gavin Plumb was interviewed and gave no comment responses to all questions. However, his silence didn't matter. The initial evidence provided by the US was enough to charge him with soliciting murder, as well as encouraging or assisting others to commit rape and kidnapping. As the police analysed his devices, the evidence against him grew, and the true sickness of this monster was laid bare. He was remanded to prison to await his day in court. I came across some information after I'd made the majority of the video, but I felt I needed to add it because it epitomises how disgusting Gavin Plumb is and how little he cares about anyone but himself. So it appears that in the course of his conversation with David Nelson, Plumb mentioned about his 15-year-old son, who he'd had with Laura Roberts, becoming involved in his plan. I didn't mention before that their second child was a daughter. Plumb claimed that his son was interested in the plan to abduct, rape and murder Holly Willoughby, and he even sent David a picture of him. As if this wasn't bad enough, he claimed that his son, due to being an underage male, could be used as leverage against Holly. I have no idea what he's implying there really, and it's not elaborated on in any reports I've read. Potentially threatening his life in order to manipulate her into doing what he wanted. Who really knows? The police were forced to speak to Plumb's son to determine whether there was any truth in this. Clearly there wasn't, but can you imagine this poor child having to discuss the actions of his monster of a father? Everything I've read seems to indicate that Plumb had no contact with his children, given that he was a domestic abuser and sex offender. So either he had no contact with his son, but was quite happy to send pictures of him online, which I assume he got from social media, to some random who he was discussing committing rape with, or he had, by some miracle, regained contact with his son, and rather than cherishing this connection and trying to build on it, he was thinking about getting him involved in his disgusting fantasies. Regardless, this is such a blatant lie, and it's really not clear why Plumb made such a bizarre claim. Ultimately, the depravity of Gavin Plumb is just staggering. The fact that he would involve his child in these types of discussions shows how much of a piece of shit he is. I'm recording this section separately after everything else, so I don't mention this point again, but I think it just builds on what I say later about this absolute predator. Gavin Plumb pleaded not guilty to all charges. His trial at Chelmsford Crown Court began on the 24th of June 2024. Plumb's defence was that everything was just a fantasy. He didn't mean any of it. I've already outlined some of the things he said in court. The kid that he said was bought because of an ex-girlfriend who didn't exist. He tried to abduct women before because he was trying to get sent to prison because he was the one being abused by his partner. His defence stated that Plumb, quote, had neither the means or the opportunity to carry out any of the things he mentioned in his chats. He also said his communications online were a dark and twisted fantasy, but a fantasy nonetheless. They also claimed that Plumb was embarrassed and ashamed by his actions. Much was made of Plumb's weight, but this was countered by the fact that he was mobile, with him being employed when he was arrested, and he was recruiting others to overcome any physical difficulties he may have had. Plumb gave evidence, saying he was unable to stand whilst doing so, and he reiterated that everything was just fantasy. His responses to questions were ridiculous. With regards to why he bought what he believed to be chloroform, he responded saying he was going to use it to clean up a stain next to his fridge. Yep, so this dude was going to use a toxic substance to clean his floor. Gotcha. The prosecution had mountains of evidence, including live testimony from David Nelson, the undercover officer whose amazing police work likely saved at least one woman, but likely many more, from a terrible fate. On the 4th of July 2024, after deliberating for just 12 hours and 19 minutes, the jury delivered their verdict, guilty on all counts. As the verdicts were read, Gavin Plumb broke down in tears. He returned to the same court on the 12th of July 2024 for sentencing, standing before Mr. Justice Murray. The sentencing was filmed, and I'll leave a link to the full hearing in the description, but I'm going to play the latter half where the judge speaks about the risk Plumb poses and passes the sentence.
In relation to the offence of encouraging or assisting the offence of kidnap, I bear in mind, in relation to the underlying offence of kidnapping, the principles summarised by the Court of Appeal in the Crown and Saqib, S-A-Q-I-B. In relation to the offence of encouraging or assisting the offence of rape, I've had regard to the Sentencing Council guideline on rape. Given that all three of your offences were part of a single plan to kidnap, rape, and murder Holly Willoughby, the correct approach in this case is to pass concurrent sentences that reflect the totality of your offending. Although not all of the detail of the plan discussed by you with Mark over the course of 18 months was discussed with David Nelson during the 30 hours or so of your kick message exchanges with him, the plan that you revealed to David Nelson was, in its fundamentals, the plan discussed with Mark. Accordingly, in assessing culpability and harm of your offence of soliciting murder, I've had regard to the evidence about the plan that emerges from the WhatsApp exchanges between you and Mark. The key point in this regard is that the plan to murder Ms. Willoughby was the end point of a plan developed over a considerable time to kidnap and falsely imprison her for the principal purpose of raping and otherwise sexually abusing her over a sustained period of time in ways that, judging by your discussions with Mark, would have been particularly sadistic, brutal, and degrading. The plan was, in short, the context in which you solicited David Nelson to murder or assist you in murdering Ms. Willoughby. I have no hesitation in concluding that each of your three offences is one of very high culpability, having in regard in particular to the sexual motivation of your offending and your intention to inflict extreme and gratuitous degradation on your victim. The intended harm of each offence was, in each case, of the highest category for the relevant offence. There is no doubt that if you had genuinely found one or more accomplices who were seriously interested and had been willing to join you in carrying your plan through, then you would have put this plan into action. Turning to the aggravating factors in this case, and taking care to avoid double counting, I find that your offences are aggravated by the following factors. A, your prior convictions for violent, sexually motivated offences against women by way of attempted kidnap and false imprisonment. B, the lengthy and detailed planning of your intended offences against Ms. Willoughby over the course of nearly 2 years. C, the purchase of items to be used in the commission of the offences, including your restraint kit, a knife, and chloroform. D, the research you conducted into the personal life of Ms. Willoughby. E, the fact that you sought to encourage more than one person to commit these offences with you. F, the fact that you intended to commit these offences in Ms. Willoughby's home and to involve her husband and children and to harm them. And G, your plan to carry one or more knives to the scene to be used in the attack and to be used to murder Ms. Willoughby. I do find that there is some mitigation in this case. A, your plan was unlikely to succeed, given number one, your physical limitations, in particular your gross obesity and the accompanying physical aspects, health aspects of that. Secondly, your lack of a car and a driving license, although I note that you were taking driving lessons, and having no driving license would not have prevented you from driving Ms. Willoughby's car. And thirdly, the difficulty you would have had in practice of bringing Ms. Willoughby to your own flat undetected, and your lack of any alternative premises in which to keep her, although you had researched various possibilities. I note, however, in relation to this point, namely the unlikeliness of your offences succeeding, your intended offences succeeding, that the essence of your offences was the soliciting of murder by another and the encouraging or assisting of another to kidnap and rape. That is the essence of those offences. It is fortunate that you did not succeed in finding one or more others who might have been considerably more physically able, and perhaps more able in other ways, than you were at the time of the offending. You were born on the 25th of February 1987. You are now 37 years old. I have borne in mind your background of physical ill health, including increasing struggles with obesity to the point of gross obesity from the age of 13, as well as the social difficulties, physical health issues, and mental health issues that have accompanied that. I have borne in mind that all of your research regarding Ms. Willoughby was done online and that you never went to her house or stalked her in person, although it is clear that you considered and discussed doing so. All three of your offences fall within Schedule 19 to the Sentencing Act 2020. Given all that I know about you, having presided over your trial, I do not consider it necessary to have had a pre-sentence report for purposes of assessing whether you are a dangerous offender. I am required first to consider whether I must impose a sentence of imprisonment for life, given the seriousness of each of these offences. Although the offences of which you have been convicted concern only one woman, it is clear from the evidence, including your prior convictions, that you pose a significant risk to women generally of serious harm occasioned by the commission of sexually motivated acts of threatened and actual violence. I find, in other words, that you are dangerous. Having regard to the seriousness of each of your offences individually and together, as well as everything else I know about you, including the facts of your prior convictions for similarly sexually motivated violent offending against women, I conclude that I must impose on you a sentence of imprisonment for life. It will, in fact, be 3 concurrent sentences of imprisonment for life. This is not a case of such extreme seriousness that it is necessary to impose a whole life order, in other words, an order under which there is no possibility of you being released. Accordingly, I must determine the minimum term that you must serve for each of these offences. If I'd been sentencing you to a determinate sentence, taking account of the numerous aggravating and limited mitigating factors in this case, but avoiding double counting, after a trial I would have sentenced you to concurrent sentences of 24 years imprisonment for each offence. Because you would have served up to 2/3 of that sentence in custody, I fixed the minimum term you will serve at 2/3 of 24 years, that is, 16 years. Finally, I reduce that minimum term of 16 years by the number of days which you've spent on remand in custody, 280 days. This means that the minimum term which you will serve before the parole board may consider your possible release is one of 15 years and 85 days. It is important that you and everyone concerned with this case should understand what this means. The minimum term is not a fixed term after which you will automatically be released. You must serve every single day of that minimum term, and it must be served before the parole board can undertake their first review of the case. At that stage, they will review the risk that you then present and will consider whether you can properly be released from custody subject to license at that stage, and if so, on what terms. If and when you are released, you will be subject to license, and this will remain the case for the rest of your life. If for any reason your license is revoked, you will be recalled to prison to continue to serve your life sentence in custody, and it may well be that you will never be released again. It follows that unless and until the parole board consider that your release is appropriate, you will remain in custody, and as I've just said, possibly for the rest of your life. In order to protect Ms. Willoughby from further harassment, you will be subject to a restraining order prohibiting you from contacting or attempting to contact her directly or indirectly, including via social media, email, telephone, post, or text message, and prohibiting you from entering an exclusion zone shown in a map attached to the restraining order. The restraining order also prohibits you from attending as an audience member or for any other purpose any television show or other public event that Ms. Willoughby is presenting or appearing in or at. This order will last indefinitely. Given that I will be imposing a life sentence for each of your offences, it is not necessary for me to make a sexual harm prevention order against you, as the risk that you pose in that regard will be adequately managed through the management of your life sentences. I certify that you've been convicted of a sexual offence, so that you must, for the rest of your life, keep the police informed at all times of your personal particulars, the address at which you are living, and any alteration in the name you are using. You will be given full details of these requirements on a form at the end of this hearing. The offences of which you have been convicted are ones that will make you subject to barring from working with vulnerable adults. You will be told of the restrictions under the Safeguarding Vulnerable Groups Act 2006 by the Disclosure and Barring Service. The statutory surcharge provisions apply to this sentence. Gavin Plumb, please stand up. Over a number of years, you pursued an unhealthy sexual obsession with Holly Willoughby that led you ultimately to plan over that period to kidnap, to rape, and to murder her. You researched her home address, her security arrangements, her daily routine, her route to work, her family. You assembled a restraint kit. You bought what you believed to be chloroform to incapacitate her and her husband. You intended to harm her husband and her children as part of your plan. You attempted to recruit several people to help you. You discussed with Mark and with David Nelson, and no doubt others, in hideous and revolting detail, the prolonged sexual violence that you intended to inflict on Ms. Willoughby once you abducted her and had her under your control. You had previously been convicted of terrifying offences involving the threat of sexual violence against 4 different young women. I found you to be dangerous. You solicited David Nelson to murder Ms. Willoughby or to assist you in murdering her. You encouraged Mark and David Nelson to participate in your plan to kidnap and rape Ms. Willoughby. The jury saw through the various lies that you told at the trial and convicted you of these offences, for which I now sentence you as follows. For the offence of soliciting murder, I sentence you to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 15 years and 85 days. For the offence of encouraging or assisting the commission of the offence of kidnapping, I sentence you to life imprisonment with a minimum term to serve of 15 years and 85 days. And for the offence of encouraging or assisting the commission of the offence of rape, I sentence you to life imprisonment with a minimum term to serve of 15 years and 85 days. You may go down.
So, to clarify, for the plot to kidnap, rape, and murder Holly Willoughby, Gavin Plumb was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 16 years, but due to him having been on remand for 280 days, he has to serve at least 15 years and 85 days from the date of sentence before he can apply for parole. This, by my calculation, means that Plumb will be around 52 years old when he can make a bid for freedom. As he was led to the cells to begin his sentence, Plumb is reported to have said, quote, 15 years to kill myself. And this just epitomises the pathetic nature of this man, the perpetual victim, a man who has no ability to take responsibility for his actions or accept his punishment. May he rot. It's extremely important to remember the impact on the other victims of Gavin Plumb, including the 2 female flight attendants he tried to abduct in 2006, Emma Ashby and her best friend Louise, who Plumb was intent on abducting and raping in 2008, and Laura Roberts, who had to endure 3 years of physical, psychological and sexual abuse at the hands of this monster. I hope they've been able to find some semblance of peace, knowing their attacker is finally behind bars. With regards to Holly Willoughby, I can only imagine the absolute horror she's been through since she was first told about the plot to kill her after Gavin Plumb's arrest in 2023. She had to step down from her role on This Morning, a show she'd hosted since 2009, having to say goodbye to her friends and colleagues, to be with her husband and 3 children, knowing that monster had come within a hair's breadth of ripping her away from her loved ones, all to satisfy his sick sexual fantasies. It's reported that she'd been guarded by ex-military personnel when filming a recent show. However, this immensely strong woman has continued with her life, including fronting charity campaigns and being the radiant and beautiful woman she is. I hope she too takes some comfort from the fact this sick parasite is now exactly where he belongs, and she and her family can heal from this ordeal. Holly Willoughby, her husband, and her children are in my thoughts. I mentioned earlier about my thoughts about the environment which likely resulted in the development of the monster that is Gavin Plumb. This included likely being exposed to abuse against women, potentially his mother, but also her likely raising him without boundaries, not calling him out on his mistakes, making excuses for his behaviour, helping him see himself as the perpetual victim and superior to everyone else, creating a child and then a man who felt he was entitled to get what he wanted, and if he was refused, he was well within his rights to use violence and abuse as a form of punishment. When he became a teenager, he wanted the attention of girls, but they rejected him. This was contrary to what he believed, that he was entitled to everything, and his resentment towards women increased. He was also an insecure child and man, with cripplingly low self-esteem, hence why he ate. This was his comfort. However, his other way of making himself feel better, and to achieve a sense of power, was to victimise women, to beat, abuse and rape them. He also enjoyed their fear, their terror. He found this sexually arousing. He saw women as less than human. They were bitches and slags. They deserved to be abused because they rejected him. He was in fact the victim. Poor Gavin. But as time progressed, I think that the focus became more and more about sadism, the sexual excitement and arousal he got from imagining acts of torture and degradation against women, having ultimate control over them, raping them whenever he chose, and eventually, when he got bored of them, taking their lives. Several articles have been written asking whether Gavin Plumb was an incel. The short answer is no. You can see why people may think this: an isolated, self-entitled loner, a misogynist, a self-pitying, pathetic man. But this is where the similarities end. The 2 people I've covered who fit into this category, Elliot Rodger and Jake Davison, committed acts of violence as a way of punishing the world, to strike back into society they felt not given them what they wanted. Plumb didn't care about any of that. He simply wanted to abduct, rape and kill women. I would argue that he's far more dangerous than an incel, and is actually more in line with other sexual sadists such as Leonard Lake and Charles Ng and Gary Heidnik, men who wanted to collect women to rape and then murder. I think one of the most disturbing insights into the mind of Gavin Plumb actually comes from his bizarre voice note, where he seems to believe that getting a woman he's abducted to make a video or sign a bit of paper, clearly whilst under duress, stating that she'd consented to everything, would protect him from prosecution. I believe this shows just how little Gavin Plumb understands about consent, or likely even cares. To him, it's just a word, something he has a vague awareness of that is relevant to criminal law, and he seemed to think a woman simply saying yes, regardless of the situation, somehow constitutes consent. I genuinely believe this monster would beat a woman to within an inch of her life until he forced her to agree to have sex with him, and would then violently rape her, all the while she's crying and screaming, and then he'd walk into court and say, yes, she was screaming during, and saying no, but she said yes before, whilst I was punching me in the face, so what's the problem? This whole case is completely fucked up, but there are certain elements which I picked up on, which I think show the utter contempt of Gavin Plumb. I don't often mention body language in my videos, as it's not something I understand particularly well, but I did notice that both in court and just after his arrest, there are pictures of Plumb with his arms crossed. This is clearly an act of defiance, him showing his anger that people are daring to tell him what to do. I honestly believe that Plumb has no remorse for his actions, and in his mind, he has done nothing wrong. I hope during this video I've dispelled this almost comical perception of Gavin Plumb based on his physical appearance that appears to have pervaded the press with repeated references made to him wheezing and sweating, etc. This man is a dangerous, predatory, sexual sadist. His weight was not an impediment to him hunting women to rape, and in fact, realistically, his size could have easily allowed him to overpower much smaller victims. However, some other comments I've read have said things like, he wouldn't have gotten to Holly Willoughby, it was all just fantasy. I think these people are missing the point. As his former partner Laura Roberts astutely put it, if he hadn't attacked Holly, he would have found someone else, potentially one of the 136 celebrities on his list, or his next door neighbour, or he would have gone back to trawling the streets. This man was determined to rape and likely kill someone, and I have no doubt he would have eventually been successful. Gavin Plumb is an extremely dangerous man, a self-pitying waste of space, who is likely sitting in his cell right now, feeling hard done by, that he has been wronged and is in prison for no reason. We can only hope that the parole board never see fit to release this monster back into the world. So, what's your thoughts on this case? If you like the content, then consider becoming a channel member by clicking the join button. You can also send a one-off donation to support the channel using the thanks button. Please like, share and subscribe. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.